So today I'm just going to show you how to join the squares of my new pattern. This is called the Trellis pattern, and it's a crochet pattern designed to go with my new wildflower club that is running throughout 2021. So as you can see here, I've made 2 squares. If I just zoom out a little bit, I've made 2 squares, so this is the start of my blanket. So the first thing I want to do is show you how to join your squares together once you've made them. So my 3rd square, I've already got now to the start of the 6th round with DK. So this is the start of the last round of your square, and I've worked up to the corner. So I'm just going to show you how to join this square to the previous square. So we're on the first row of squares, and if I zoom in, you'll be able to see how I'm joining that. So, as I said, we were on the final round, and I'm just going to start the popcorn stitch, and I'm going to show you how to do that into this corner gap between the 2 popcorns. So I'm going to do 5 trebles into that gap, that's 3, 4 and 5. Okay, so I've done those 5 trebles now, and what I'm going to do is put my crochet hook into the top of the first treble, which is just here. So I've taken that loop off. I'm going to then put that loop back on, tighten my yarn up, and then pull through to make the popcorn. So where you would normally do a chain 2 at this corner, we're actually going to join onto the top corner of the previous square. So you can see on this previous square there is a chain 2 in this gap, but instead of chaining 2, I'm going to just take the 2 squares with the corners facing each other, and I'm going to put my hook with my loop through that gap, so top to bottom. I'm going to take my yarn and then wrap over as if to do a regular slip stitch, and then slip that straight through. So what we've got now, if I zoom in you might be able to see, we've actually got those 2 squares joined together at the corner. So now we've done that, what I'm going to do is do my 2nd popcorn, so exactly the same as before. Then we're going to do another 5 trebles into that corner, so same chain 2 gap, another 5. So that's 1, 2, 3, and that's 4 there, look. And the final one, we're going to do the popcorn stitch exactly the same way as we did before. So take your hook from the yarn, pop it into the top of the first treble and pull through. So this time what we're going to do is slip stitch again, but we're going to go in the gap between the popcorn here on your previous square and between your first set of trebles, so you might need to just pull it apart slightly. And we're doing exactly the same thing, hook top to bottom, yarn round, pull through into the gap, and then pull through. So it's getting secured as we go along. And then what we're going to do is carry on doing our sets of trebles across the side to join. And the first one obviously going into that gap between the popcorn and this first set of trebles, just like we did here, but we're doing 3 trebles into there to form the final round of your next square. So that's 3 trebles into there and into the next gap of the previous square. You guessed it, we're just going to do another slip stitch into there, hook top to bottom, pull your yarn through and then slip through, and we're going to do another set of trebles. So we're just going to carry that on until we get to the end of the trebles. I'm going to stop before we get to the popcorn at the corner, just so that I can show you what to do just there. Okay, so now I've joined, as you can see, all the way along that side. Let's just zoom out a bit so you can see what we're doing. Okay, so I've joined all the way along. So we joined that corner right at the beginning, and now I've joined all the way down to the bottom corners. So all I need to do now is join the popcorns. So I've just slipped into the gap between this last set of trebles on the previous square and the first corner popcorn. So I'm going to do my first popcorn stitch into the chain 2 between those two popcorns, into the gap, sorry, of the chain 2 between the popcorns on the previous round of our current square. So let's just pop that popcorn in there. So again, we're doing 5 trebles. That's 4 and 5. I'm going to pull that through again. So the same as before, rather than making any chains, we're just going to slip stitch into this gap here between the popcorns. So that's the corner gap between the popcorns on your previous square. We're just slip stitching like before. And now we're going to work along this side. So no need to chain. We're just going to do another popcorn into this corner here. So this is 3 trebles, 4, and oops, I just didn't quite pick that yarn up properly. So that's 4 and 5 and another popcorn. So hook into the top of that first treble and then pull through. And we're going to carry on the rest of the current square exactly how we've done the previous rounds. So we're still working the trebles into the gaps, the 3 trebles into the gaps on the previous round, I should say, until we get to the popcorn. And what we're going to do when we get to the corner for the popcorns, we're going to do as we have done with the previous round. So we're going to put those chain 2s in between the popcorns. So I'm just going quickly to get to the corner. And this is the last chain 3. Chain 3, 3 trebles. So now we're at the corner again. So you can see there's these 2 popcorns here. And we're going to popcorn, chain 2, and then popcorn again. So like you do on the previous rounds. So that's 3, 4, and 5. And then finish that popcorn, chain 2, and then popcorn again. So you carry on all the way round until you finish that square. So all along this side and back again to the beginning. And if I just turn them round, you can see that these 3 squares are now joined. So I did the same when I joined these 2 together. We're just joining each time along the side. So when this one's finished, the next square goes on. For example, that will just fit alongside there. So we'll have a nice set of, or nice row of squares all together. So now you've seen how to join the first row together, I'm going to move on and show you how to start joining your second row. Okay, so now we've joined the 3 squares on the top row, and we know that we're joining each. So we're joining the right side of the previous square to the left side of our current square, all the way across the top row. So I've only got 3 here just to show you. But when we go to the second row, we're going to be joining the first square of the second row, or the third or fourth, or whatever you like, to the first square on the previous row. So I've started this square off here, just doing the normal treble pattern. So I've done 3 trebles and I'm about to do my popcorn. Whereas this row differs, rather than joining this way, we're going to just join along here. So we'll popcorn into this corner and then join up to here. Another difference on this row is that instead of joining to this popcorn corner for our first one, we're going to join at the diagonal, so it makes a really secure border or join line or whatever you'd like to call it. So when we do the first popcorn here, instead of slip stitching into the gap on this square, so the first square, we're going to join on the next one, so we're joining on the diagonal. And then you can imagine when we come to join this square just here, instead of joining here or here in the gaps, we're going to slip stitch into this one, so we're forming a cross of slip stitches, which will give it more of a structural integrity, so the blanket will hold a bit firmer and it will keep its shape. Okay, so we're going to do exactly the same. So I've just finished here, whether you can see, I've just finished a chain three, three trebles, dear me. So I've just finished those 3 trebles, and I'm just going to work 1 popcorn into the corner. So we're going to do 5 as before, and that should be 4, and last one. So now that's 5 that we've worked into there, 5 trebles, and we're going to just pull that loop through, if I can get my hook into it properly. There we go. So pull it tight once it's on and pull it through to secure. Okay, so as I said, same as before, we're not going to chain, we're just going to slip stitch, but slip stitch into this gap between these 2 popcorns on the last row of here. So the design I'm doing for this blanket is I'm using a main colour and I'm alternating, and I'm using a different square. So my main colour, well, it's like a checkerboard effect really. So we're going to put a slip stitch into this gap between these trebles. So same as before, we're going to go top to bottom. So you can see the hook is through that gap there. Exactly the same as before, we're going to yarn over. I've got that extra loop on my hook and then slip it through. And that's it, that's secured. So same as before, we're going to work 1 more popcorn into this corner. So that is 5 trebles. I'm just going to move that out of the way just so that you can see what I'm doing. That's 2, 3, 4 and 5, and pull through the top of the first one. You might just have to move this popcorn out of the way just so that you can see the top of that treble. Pull through and pull tight, and the same as we did when we were joining these squares, we're going to find that gap between the group of trebles and the popcorn in the corner. So there's that little gap there, and we're just going to slip stitch through exactly the same way. So that's secured on now, and now we'll carry on along the sides, putting trebles into those gaps exactly the same way as before. So, oops. It's pretty hard doing it and filming it at the same time, so I'm sorry if it's not an exactly professional job that I'm doing here, but you get the gist. So there's my 3 trebles, and I'm going to find the next gap between the trebles on this square, which, because these are dark, it's quite difficult. So if I put my finger there, the gap's just there, top to bottom, and just slip stitch to secure. So I'm going to do that all the way along until the last gap between the treble just here and then the first popcorn at the corner. Okay, so what I've done now is I've worked all the way along the top. So we joined at that corner, we slip stitched and done the last row of trebles along the top. I've slip stitched into the final gap between these 3 trebles and the first popcorn at the corner. And we'll do exactly the same as we did before. We'll do a popcorn stitch. So your 5 trebles into that gap left by the chain 2 on the previous round. So that's 3, 4, and this is the final one. Let's finish off that popcorn. Okay, and same as before, we're going to find that chain 2 gap between the 2 popcorns just here, hook in top to bottom and slip stitch 3. So we're not doing any chains. Just turn my work, and we're going to work now along this edge. So no chains again. And the reason that I don't do the chains here is because it actually forms a neater edge along the top and the bottom, especially if you want to put a border on. It'll actually stretch this join out, and it will actually make the squares look a lot more symmetrical once they're finished. So no chains, we're just going to do a popcorn into here. So we're just doing a popcorn into that same gap. So that's 2, 3, 4, and final one. It's the final treble of the popcorn. Pop my hook into the top of the first treble and pull through. So that is our popcorn finished. So what we're going to do, exactly the same as all the other times, we're going to carry on doing our groups of trebles into the gaps, the first one of which will be between this popcorn of the previous round and this set of trebles, and work all the way around. When you get to the next corner and that second corner there, before you get back to the start of the round, you are going to do the chain 2 between the popcorns. Okay, so I'm going to finish this one off, and then I'm going to show you how to join the second square of that row. Okay, right, we've joined these 2 squares on. So this is our first row, and we've just joined the first square of the second row. So every row that you do will be the same from now on. You'll join the first one just across the top, and then when we come to join the next one along, we're going to have to join it along the top and along the side. So we're going to be marrying together this join here and this join that we've done. So on this square, I'm on my final round. So I started just here. I've done 3 trebles, and I'm just going to do, I just need to do 1 popcorn into the corner here. So just between the 2 popcorns of the previous round, you can see my chain 2 is just there. I'm going to do 1 popcorn into here before I join my square. So as before, instead of joining directly onto this square in the first, from the first corner just here, we're going to join diagonally. So I'll do my first popcorn, and I'm going to slip stitch into the gap. If I can just zoom in so that you can see. So I'm actually going to do my popcorn into this gap here, and then when I'm finished, I'm going to slip stitch after that first popcorn into the chain, well, it would be the chain 2 gap at that corner. As we haven't done the chain 2 gap, you will be able to see that there is a space between these 2 popcorns. You might just have to widen that gap a little bit to see it. But the reason we don't do the chain 2 here is to make sure that this join here is as tight and as snug as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to do my popcorn. So I've done my last set of trebles, and I'm going to popcorn into that chain 2 gap from the previous round. Exactly the same as before, 5 trebles into that corner. So there's my 5, and just pop my hook into the top of that first treble. Just wait for the camera to focus. So there's my first treble out of that 5, and just going to pull that through to make my popcorn. So now it gets a bit fiddly because you're juggling so many different squares, and obviously as it gets bigger it gets a little bit more difficult to kind of maneuver it around. But we're joining, so I've just done this popcorn just here. So we're joining this corner here to this corner here. So I'm going to find the gap between those two popcorns, which is just there. I'm going to put my hook top to bottom through that gap, find my yarn, wrap over as before, and just slip stitch into that gap. So you can see there's the gap just there. So slip stitch and pull through. Then I'm going to do another popcorn into this chain 2 space as before. Two, 3, oops, got a bit tangled then. So that's 4, and my final one makes 5. Okay, and exactly the same as before, top of the first treble and pull 3. Okay, so I've done my 2 popcorns. So now we're going to join along to this square. So the slip stitch between the 2 popcorns where we're attaching to this one, now we're going to work along the edge of this one just here. So the first slip stitch we're going to do is between the second popcorn, so there's the gap, there's those 2 popcorns of this one, and the gap, we're going to chain into the gap between this popcorn here and this first set of trebles. So let me move my yarn so that I'm not getting all tangled. Okay, so top to bottom, slip stitch in and through, and that's it. And all we do now is we're going to do our first trebles into the gap between the second popcorn here on the previous row. So 3 trebles into here, excuse me, 3 trebles into here, and then carry all the way along. So exactly the same as we've done before. Okay, that's our 3 trebles. So we're going to find the next gap between the trebles on this square, which is just here, and slip stitch in again. So we're going to carry on doing that all the way along until we've completed our first popcorn on this corner. So we'll go all the way up to completing our first popcorn. Right, so I've just finished the popcorn, the first popcorn, and then pulled it off. Anyway, right, so the last slip stitch that I did to this white square just here was between the last set of trebles and the first popcorn. So I'm now going to finish this popcorn again. That popcorn's finished. So the same way as we did before, rather than joining to this square, we're going to join diagonally. So the slip stitch that I'm going to make will be between these 2 popcorns on the square diagonal from the one that I'm working. So I'll find that gap, which is, if I turn, it's probably easier to see, is just here. I'm going to put my hook in top to bottom and just slip stitch into that gap and then pull through. So now all of the squares are attached. So this square is attached to this one, and we're now going to work down this edge here. So first we need to do our second popcorn. Remember, no chains when we're joining the squares together, when we're doing the corners that aren't currently joined to anything. So when I finish this square, I will do, in this corner just here, I will do a chain 2 and then join back to the beginning of the round. So popcorn is going to go in this corner here. I'm going to lift it up a little bit just so that you can see what I'm working on. So we're going to popcorn into that chain 2 gap from the previous round. Two trebles, 3, 4, oops, 4 and 5, almost, 5, there we go, we'll get there eventually, and we're going to pull that through. Okay, second popcorn done. So we're going to work down the side. So what we first need to do is slip stitch into this square that we're going to be joining alongside. So we're going to find the gap between the last popcorn in the corner and the first set of trebles. So this gap just here, top to bottom with your hook. Just move that out of the way and yarn over and pull through. So now we're securing to this square. So next gap between the popcorn and the treble of the previous round, we're going to do our 3 trebles. So that's 1, 2, 3, and then we'll slip stitch into the gap of that other square. So here we go. So we've got first set treble, second, and there's the gap in between. Slip stitch into there and pull through. So we'll carry on all the way to the corner. So we're going to carry on all the way down this edge to the corner, and then we're going to start our popcorn corner. So I'll see you when we get to that point. So my first popcorn is done. I've joined all the way along this side just here, and what I'm going to do is find the gap between the popcorns here. So this is on the square next to it. So there's a chain 2 gap there. So I'm just going to slip stitch into that gap, making no chains. I'm going to turn, and then I'm going to popcorn into this space again. Okay, so one of the reasons that I don't chain as well, because it does give it a good structure, but when you do that first yarn over on your hook for the treble, it tends to be a bit loose, so you do get the effect of an extra chain in that gap. So I'm going to finish the popcorn. So that's 3 trebles, 4 and 5, and okay, so there's the popcorn, and we're going to work all the way along to this corner. And when we get to this corner, between those popcorns there, we are going to put a chain 2, because we'll need that chain 2 gap to join to when we do our next square. So once we've finished this one, I'll show you the whole thing together. Right, so here we are. So we've joined, we've showed you how to join your first row of squares. You're just joining along one edge all the way along. And then when you come to the second row, or the third or fourth, or any row below that, you're just joining on the top edge for the first square. And for every subsequent square, you're joining firstly along the top and then along the side. So as a quick reminder, when you join, so when you join this square just along the top, instead of just joining to this square, your first slip stitch will be diagonal. Same here. When you join your first slip stitch diagonal to this square, work your way along, and then you'll join this square with a slip stitch into the corner here. So we're just getting, if I can show you nicely, where these squares meet, you can see that we've got that red join over there, but it actually gives us a really firm join between those squares, and it helps keep the shape. So obviously you're free to join your squares however you like. This is just the way that I choose to do it. It's nice and quick. You can join them as you go. Because I'm doing my blanket in sets of mini skeins, this is the DK blanket, I will have the 5 mini skeins across, and I'll have a main colour in between each one. So my blanket will be 10 squares wide, and then hopefully maybe 12 squares long. So it'll be quite a big blanket. These are approximately 6-ish inches once they're joined together. So that's how I do my join as you go for this trellis blanket. If you wanted to put a border pattern round, you're absolutely free to do that. Do whatever you want, but this is just the way that I like to do it. And then when I get to the end, I'll have to pick a border. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'll leave all the contact details and everything that you need in the video, just in the drop down box below. And I hope you really enjoy this pattern. I'd love to hear what you think.